And today we're going to talk about teaching creative writing, specifically fiction and specifically flash fiction. Wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what sort of contextualizing what is fiction, and we're not going to do a lot of philosophizing about what is fiction, but kind of what we're thinking about when we think about fiction. We're thinking about stories, we're thinking about experiences as they are meaningful in terms of the human experience, of course. And we're thinking about it in terms of the craft of fiction, not really the study of literature, but the craft of it. So we want to think about it in terms of really making something. And to that end, I'm going to list off just very quickly some of the fictive elements that we work with in creative writing. Of course, dialogue, for example, character, setting, theme, plot, conflict, world building, these kinds of things. And so I'm going to share my screen and first talk about kind of the shape of stories. And then I'm going to talk about flash fiction itself as something that I think can be very useful, particularly in the classroom. I don't know if anyone has heard of flash fiction yet, but I guess we'll save questions till the end. So let me share my screen very quickly. And I'm sure some of you have seen this image before. So, I'm not sharing my screen. Hang on. There it is. Okay. All right. So this is actually one of the middle slides. I'm going to skip around in my PowerPoint. I think almost all English teachers have seen the sort of story arc shape, I think. For creative writing, we look at it a little bit differently. Of course, we have our inciting incident. We have, it's kind of on the graph of like time and then dramatic tension. Something happens, it complicates life. Then there's some kind of like climactic moment and then the falling action or resolution. And so really, we're playing with all of these different elements to create some kind of story that somebody somewhere would want to watch or read, take time out of their day to do that. And so the main thing is, when I tell my students, is we want to do this so that it's not boring. It has to be interesting, right? It has to be interesting. And before we even get to interesting, it has to be understandable. So one of the things I would also say is that when I talk about fiction, we want to think about it as a continuum in terms of like how to shape a story. We're going to kind of talk about story shapes first. But there's two things to that. One is the life, right? Life as in it feels real. You can connect with the characters. I'm not going to say relatable, but you can, you have some kind of emotional access to them. It feels real in terms of like something that you can emotionally connect with, but it has a shape, right? So think of the life side as like the water, and the shape side is like the vase, right? You can put it in whatever shape you want as long as it has both. And you want to meet that in the middle. You want to have both. So you want to, if you go too much to the side of the shape, then it has a shape, but it feels wooden, perhaps predictable, perhaps boring. If it has too much life, but not enough shape, you're like, wow, something's happening. It's interesting, but I have no idea what I just read. I have no idea because it's not that clear. It doesn't have a shape. And so we always want to kind of keep those things in balance and as much as we can to have them together so that it feels real and it has a shape to where, the people either reading or viewing, I certainly consider television storytelling a lot of times, that they can have that emotional access and they're able to sort of see that story clearly unfolding in a way that is meaningful. So we want to have, again, shape and life. We want to have the thing that gives it the sparkle, the feelings and all that, but we want to put it inside of a shape that people don't come away going like, what happened? I don't even know. Okay, so we want comprehension. Anyway, and so this is sort of why we have this narrative arc here. Something happens, something gets complicated, there's a climactic moment, and then some kind of resolution over time. And so I'm going to kind of go back a little bit and talk about this. Here we go. And this is what story shapes are. They're sort of, this is a little kind of overview of story shapes. I have this Super Mario here because I do want to say that stories are everywhere. Even video games have, I know this is an old video game, but even video games have some kind of story, some kind of narrative. And there are rules within the shapes of those narratives. And so we're going to kind of go with that first. So one of them is the linear, sort of like, oh, somebody wakes up in the morning and the story happens kind of chronologically, or perhaps goes backwards. But in either way, it's sort of, A to B or B to A. The story moves forward, beginning, middle, ending, sort of in the way that time happens. Another way is a braided narrative. Sometimes those are better, depending on the style of story that you're telling. And this is what I would say to your students is think about taking a shape that works with what you want to tell. Particularly if you have, various main characters, it could be that a braided storyline would be better. This is maybe alternating between 2 points in time or 2 plot sequences, maybe 2 perspectives or things like that. There's also the story shape that I like to call the rock in the water. And this is where something happens, some probably dramatic thing happens. And then the story kind of reverberates from that thing. Everything happened, maybe there was a car crash and then everything is impacted by that thing, whatever that might be. Central event, and then the narrative reverberates from that. Okay. Or there's a central event and everything unfolds over the course of time, which is why this one's a spiral. I feel like a lot of the sort of detective stories, like there's a murder and the whole series is they're trying to solve it. This is very much a spiral type of thing. There are also what we call bathtub stories or frame stories, where the story takes place within a specific frame. A really good example of that, and I know I'm using mostly television and movies references, The Princess Bride is absolutely a frame or bathtub story, right? Grandpa's reading the book to the grandson, and then of course the main story is within that, and then every once in a while we get him coming in like, it's not too scary for you, is it? That kind of thing. So the story takes place not in the present time, but within a frame. The opposite of the bathtub story is the iceberg story, where there's minimal details within the story and the emotional content is submerged. So this might be something like, a story where it's a tense dinner scene and no one comes out and says like, oh, mom and dad might be divorcing, but through the dialogue, we see that something's going on and perhaps can feel that emotional tension without having it explained, and all the stuff is underneath. It is a kind of hard story to write, but it can be done. Okay, and finally, I have this one, the experimental story. This is often a way that people write to mimic other forms of writing. So perhaps they might still tell a story that looks like a dictionary entry, or maybe it looks like a set of tweets, or maybe it looks like a parking permit application or something like that. So that they borrow a form. In creative nonfiction, it's called the hermit crab style, very similar. They borrow a different form of writing that doesn't look like a story, but they tell a story within that style. And so that's the constraint for that style. And so it's not a typical way to tell a story, but it will still be a story. Another example could be a choose your own adventure. And so there's just lots of ways you can do that. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Oh my goodness, how do I stop share? There we go. Okay, so those are basically some story shapes that you might use when you're teaching creative writing, and definitely talking to your students with the idea that it is an intentional choice which one they're going to pick as it relates to the type of thing they want to write about. It doesn't mean they have to already know, but it's something that they want to think about in terms of critical thinking. Sort of intentionally choosing what form to take for the thing they want to write about. I'm going to share my screen one more time and talk about the assignment itself. Let me just share my screen again. Okay, it's always, here we go. Okay, here we go. I think okay, I think it's up. Yes, okay. All right, so what I've actually put together is something that I'm calling the writing cycle, and it's creating a piece of short form fiction. The reason that I really like flash fiction, and flash fiction is usually maybe, I have here 750 to 1100 words. It can be as short as 300, although I don't know if you want to take it that short. It could be a 500 word piece. And they are valid forms of writing, and certainly people publish these very short pieces. The writer Molly Giles calls them the fireflies of fiction, sort of very bright and brief. And the reason that I like it is that it's a small assignment. It feels little. It sort of takes away kind of some of that anxiety, but it also, I believe, makes the students look at what the sentences are actually doing rather than, am I hitting my page limit? Is it 3 pages like she asked for? I think students have a tendency to look at how long something is as the end result, like, oh, I wrote it, it's long enough, so that's good, right? And so flash fiction, because it is so small, is obviously not about the length or the quantity of the words, but more really about the quality. What are you doing in this brief thing? How can you polish what's there? If it's supposed to be like a firefly, it needs to be bright and flashy, or at least the language needs to be really good. And so it's a way to kind of get away from that idea of quantity over quality, if you will. So the idea is you write a piece of flash fiction, and you are going to, hang on, I'm going to scroll down here. You're going to do that with a cycle of writing. I usually will have them do like several different drafts. The first draft is what I like to call a free dive. And the free dive is really a moment where instead of worrying about how to open a story, what exposition to put in or things like that, really just allowing students to just plunge into a moment, just to feel it, close your eyes, think about it. Are you in it? Are you immersed in it? And write down whatever things that come to you describing that experience, whatever that is. And it's not really different from a free write, if you will. But the main point too is that you should have some constraints on all of these things. All of these things should be directed. So the free dives should be submerging yourself in another world briefly, looking for surprises. And there are only like 3 rules. You have to write in prose. That means sentences and paragraphs, not bullet points. You have to keep it short. So if you've written 5 pages, I don't know that they will really write 5 pages in 8 minutes, but maybe keep it short. And then make sure that you are immersing yourself in the moment. Make your language as lively and descriptive as you can. So just giving that real sense of like, okay, we're plunging into this world, really thinking about describing that moment. So that's one phase. The second phase, I'm going to come back and forth in this. The second phase is draft building. After your students do this initial write, you may want to add some constraints for that second draft. In this example, I've selected that they need to add 7 new and surprising details that use the senses. Okay, and so they'll take that first draft and they'll add 7 new or surprising details that use some of the senses, right? You could change it to any of the other fictive elements. You might say, okay, add a character who is mad at the main character, or add some dialogue, and specifically what kind of dialogue, or change the setting to an urban setting and give us some clues about whatever. So the second draft is really a moment where you take any of the seven fictive elements and just kind of focus on that. You might have, something like maybe the character gets lost, a plot point. The character somehow gets lost while they're walking around or something like that. And so what you're doing is you're allowing them to be creative, but you are building in guidelines where they have to be very specific and sort of specifically addressing whatever constraints you've added. In a way, it's kind of like a puzzle. Writing this is kind of like a puzzle. Like, okay, do this, then do this, then do this, then you have a story. After you have your second phase, the draft building, you will have phase 3, the one sentence workshop. And so there are lots of one sentence workshops also, but this one, what I've chosen to highlight here is that we would take one sentence from the working draft and see if we could make it shorter by 6 words without changing the meaning of the sentence. And this is, again, we don't have to do this the same day. This might be over the course of the week that you do this. But so, for example, an original sentence: I was an English major with dreams of becoming a writer. So working in food service was my version of a paid internship. A revision: my restaurant job felt like a paid internship for an English major dreaming of becoming a writer. And so again, it's not simply that they're making the sentence shorter, but they have to keep the meaning of the sentence. And so that one sentence workshop really helps them think about how to keep that while also being concise. And I think that is actually how you can streamline a lot of the work. The other thing is you don't have to keep it to that one sentence, or you might select a specific sentence, maybe the opening sentence. I like to focus on the last sentence of the story, particularly for flash fiction, because that is sort of that last sentence is kind of where that last beat, where the whole story kind of comes together, happens. And so I'm very particular about like last sentences, like, okay, we're landing, this is the landing, stick the landing. So that's sort of so that's kind of the phase of that. The next thing is I like to have them write a 500-word justification statement that describes the choices they made in taking the story from the initial draft to the final draft. Paying specific attention to what changes they made, what they decided to leave the same, what effects they were hoping to achieve. And then, how did their idea of it change as they developed it? And of course, we have in that a peer editing day, which is maybe where that one sentence workshop would happen, and also just editing each other's drafts, practicing at least 2 more one sentence workshops. And for me, again, one of them has to be the last sentence of the story. The other thing I really like is for them to read their story aloud to themselves, because this is the best way to catch all their errors. And then turning in all the cycles together along with the final draft of the story. And so this, for me, accomplishes a couple of things. One, it really slows down the writing process. I think, and this is just from my experience, I feel that sometimes students will just write it as quickly as they can and just get it out and, okay, we're turning stuff in because we had to. Not as much in creative writing, but I feel like as a writing professor, that happens a lot. And again, taking away that idea that, oh, I wrote a lot, so that's probably good. I wrote 6 pages, so it's good. And really taking it more to what did you write and how thoughtful, were you about each line that we're looking at? And as well, really slowing down the process of taking it from that first moment of, the free dive and thinking about it and kind of immersing yourself to intentionally adding things and intentionally removing things. So that is really slowing down the revision process and thinking about it critically, and then being able to articulate the choices that were made in the justification statement, which is short and just kind of reflective, but it does ask students to really consider, why did you make that choice? And I think because really writing fiction, it has to be on purpose, right? It has to be intentional. I know that there's this idea that you just get inspired and that's it. But that's not really true. I mean, you can get inspired, but then you have to do the work of actually the discipline of it is the revision process and crafting it. So I kind of want to look at I have the prompt there for the first free dive. But we also have additional prompts. So for example, a complaint, write a completely earnest, over the top complaint letter that ultimately creates an intimate portrait of the speaker's character and situation through the complaints alone. So this might be one free dive, like write a complaint. And I can already see that something like this might turn into a story shape like that experimental one that looked like the Rubik's Cube. It also focuses on character. The second one, funny bone in 2 parts. Take 10 minutes and make a list of words or historical figures, dog breeds, or whatever that makes you laugh, even though there's nothing inherently funny about them. Or a list of times you laughed unexpectedly. Do not explain why. And part 2, explore one of the items on your list. Keep it short, use dialogue. So again, like these prompts they're there so the students can kind of immerse themselves in that initial moment of, writing the experience, but they also have the constraints that will allow us to build in a story, for example. Or magic realism. Choose a relic, artifact, or other object that represents someone you admire. This is actually a really great one. I feel my students have responded very positively to it. Even on Zoom, they will bring in some object and show it to the class and then write about it. Write a story in which you stumble upon that object. Describe the mystical influence it might have. Grocery items. Create a fake receipt for a shopping trip. 3 items are purchased, all this stuff. And exchange it with a classmate. Invent a story that connects these items. Because I think the other thing is that we want to make sure that students know that there are so many ways and stories everywhere, so many ways to find them. The grocery receipt or really anything, any of these things that, like I said, the complaint letter or the object that they have. Miscommunication. This is actually one of my favorites, maybe because I have a large family and I feel like this is constantly a theme. So write a conversation between 2 people who refuse to say what they mean, but are trying to accomplish a task together. I feel like that is so often the case and is rife with comedy. So that in this case, the students would have to write a story mainly of dialogue. That's it. So that everything is there, but without people actually saying what they mean and people kind of getting confused and they're still trying to accomplish something together. As I said, going on vacation with your family definitely is that. Sometimes you can also use things like reincarnate or like sort of fabulous ideas. Write a story in which your protagonist is confronted with a lost loved one who has come back in another form. What is the significance of the form you choose to house the spirit? Is there an important purpose or mission being handed down? So there are a lot of different ones that you can use. These are just a few of mine. The show, don't tell, 2 scenes, how are they different, things like that. Additional 1-sentence workshops. Each of these is a separate one. And I'm sure that we've all seen some kind of editing in this fashion. So delete words that mean little or nothing. I love to call them the empty calorie words. Things like really, very, what else? Sometimes the word beautiful, things that sort of don't, she was beautiful. Well, okay, but what does that mean? Delete words that repeat the meaning of other words. Delete words implied by other words. Replace a phrase with a word. Changing negatives to affirmatives. Delete useless adjectives and adverbs, even if you love them. Sometimes students have a hard time with this one. They may really love something, but you have to tell them, okay, you can love it, save it in a different draft and change it anyway. This is also one of the reasons I think that this style works very well is it's only asking them to change 1 sentence at a time. And sometimes students can be very, how could I put this? I feel that sometimes students can be very unwilling to change something that they've already written. Like, no, I wrote it. It's there. Leave it there. It can be anxiety producing, but if you ask them just to save different drafts, they'll still have their original. And you really want to think about it like this pile of words. It's like playing with Play-Doh, right? You can mush it and shape it in a different way, and it can be an ashtray, or it can be a copy of the sculpture of David. I mean, it can be anything, but it's still essentially that same pile of words. So you can move it around and do what you like. Anyway, so this is kind of my spiel. I have one thing I do like is I got a lot of this from H.K. Hummel and Stephanie Lennox's short form creative writing, a writer's guide and anthology. And so I kind of I'm going to go back up a little bit and kind of go into the specific free write. The first one, and I also like to give them choices. So for example, this one, write a short piece in which you integrate the 4 elements of tension: a person with a problem, a desire for something, and high stakes and obstacles. This is sort of like, this is the crux of how a story can be written, right? There's somebody, they want something, there's a problem that they may be having, and there's something like obstacles keeping them from it, right? This is basically any story. They want something, but the way to get it is fraught with tension and obstacles. Or they can also write a piece that explores one of John Gardner's ideas of the 2 main narratives. There's more than 2, but these are John Gardner's 2. A stranger comes to town. There are so many stories that are literally just a stranger comes to town. Or someone goes on a journey. This is also another favorite one. And certainly in the PowerPoint with Super Mario, he's going on a journey, right? So he's every level he's going on a journey. So students would write something about that. Maybe they have a character that they already want to write about. And then after that, as I said, once they've gotten through that first initial draft, they can add in 7 surprising new details about the senses. Or as I said, that second draft is really where you want them to add something related to one of the fictive elements. You might say, okay, add 5 lines of dialogue, or add in a setting in which the character gets lost, or add in a stranger coming to town. I don't know, just any of those, a plot point that is surprising, things like that. And you really want to ask them to do that, because I think one thing that often happens with creative writing is students can be both, they can maybe do one or the other usually. Like they may already have an entire story in their mind, or because it's creative, they may not know exactly how to move forward. Like, maybe they're more comfortable with, doing math or something. They're like, oh, there's a logical answer. And so this kind of thing allows them to be creative, but it gives them really specific things to follow, right? Okay, I have to add in the senses. What are some things I can add in? I have to do 7 of them. And so you can really check off whether they've done that assignment, whether they've completed it in the way that, that you've asked them to complete it. And it does allow for you to kind of check off what things are being done. And it also allows them, as I said, to kind of have a guide through all of those drafts.